So it's really weird, but basically there's time operations. They figured out how to make these like time tunnels or these portal systems where you have the same effect, which more or less occurs in some of these underground bases, these magnetic mountain core areas, and all there's like more than one area, but apparently that one is like the one for the plane or the planet.
Mount Meru.
Mm-hmm. And meaning everybody's sensor is aligned towards that flux, meaning everybody's reality centers around that convergence point. Just like the energy of your body centers around your assemblage point, your convergence point, your heart center in your chest solar plexus. Whatever happens there happens, determines what's going to happen elsewhere in your system. And your mind is kind of like it's like the guy that like flags the aircraft carriers or something like that, or it's directing. It doesn't have to be the powerhouse of it, because the true powerhouse is the biocomputer of the heart. And for some reason they call it biocomputer because more or less it manages information and is powerful enough to the point where it can process instantly what you're feeling and send it to me, even if I don't have a clue who you are. And if we're just robots, and I had to calculate what you're feeling based upon parameters I can create and replicate, then my heart's more powerful than my brain because it does everything for me. So instantly if I see somebody in pain, everybody, when we were young, there was I actually was talking about something earlier on. I'll keep the topic. We was talking about and so basically when we're young, you're like 6 years old, and you see like the first like gunfight on TV. Normally there's an adrenaline spike, the heart beats fast, you look at your parents, you're like, should we be scared? Like, is that, are they okay? It's like the brain perceives it as reality, and it's obviously the heart aspect of where we feel it from, but our systems perceive what we see and perceive through the brain, if you want to call that our soul, our empathy, our sense of that as reality. And so the idea is we're not designed, well, maybe we're designed for that, but there has to be a design implemented that makes people move out of that and feel cold and calloused and disconnected. We're not born that way. We're grown in the way that we're all like when we are not like that. I mean, I'm not going to really say that I've seen some shit and we've been in operation for some stuff, but at least I can say you, because that's the best way to talk about people, is not say like, oh, I'm fucking Mr. Compassion over here. Although I've cried my fair share for the suffering in the world. But I can tell you're not going to sit there and look at somebody suffering and be like, great, show me more. I like that. That shit would mess with you. It hurts your head, your mind, your heart. And that's basically an original human being. That's what the circuitry lined up and works. And where the processing that's supposed to be happening is taking place when that works. And so basically these other, we call them other civilizations, ancient societies or civilizations, other times. It's basically like a hall of mirrors where the reflection bounces back a certain way and comes back, and it's Egypt or Rome or the early civilizations, Babylon or pre-Babylon. And it doesn't make sense that way. Like you shine a flashlight at a mirror and it comes back and you're in a different time. But in operating through these devices, that's what it is. The same genetics, the same stuff, all that, it's mirrored, it's projected into another realm, but it's in the same space, in another time dimension, and we call this history, but it's just us in a different perspective. And so in that society, they don't eat meat, they didn't kill animals, they didn't see animals as slaves, they didn't see the earth as something to tarnish. They saw it as a soul that collapsed into rocks that did so we could climb on those rocks to get back to where we are, metaphorically. And that's basically a being dying, killing itself to give us a chance to move where it was when it dropped down. And so that was the closest I've seen because there's supposed to be a time scale for when we talk about all this, as far as the temporal operation is supposed to be close to 2020, but we'll see. That was the closest in this side, if you will, okay, and that wasn't a simulator. That was, as far as I can tell, that was real. And there's a blot that could be a simulator, and that could be a simulator, but You know, that was like people and weird stuff anyway, but that was the closest I've seen to what we would call just a civilization on the inner Earth, where people were basically like they're connected to the heart aspect. The weirdest thing is it's not like they're so special and they do this, like they weren't retarded. They didn't like eat each other, and it's a parasite infection here that's in it figured out how to code itself into this place from a place that's not supposed to be connecting to or from. It's because people opened up portals to it because they could use that as a weapon and like got AIDS in a needle and they're gonna rob the liquor store or something. Like that's basically what some of these secret societies did. And a lot of that is over the explanation that these beings had lost the ability to incarnate, and so they were helping them. It's like, well, they'll dissolve stardust, but the point is those that actually did that to help them, they'll be aligned with that. Those that did that just saying that they were trying to help and they're trying to take over the world, they're going to end up being the ones that actually turn to stardust. So really weird, that's how it works. And so the time thing is like something iffy about talking about. So then and that's, if those beings are vampire assholes, whatever, but they won't hurt animals and they respect everything, chances are it's because they don't put up with the BS that comes off the surface. And again, nobody really with an infection can navigate there or pass through what is basically a threshold where there's like some type of bridge, which just described as a rainbow bridge, and there's like these like outlines of beings that you can basically only glimpse that are from this plane until you begin to go like traverse it, and that might be different from that inner Earth basically journey place, which that might be like a resting point, whereas the actual rainbow bridge is like a place you can't come back from or something like that, or it's like where you completely permanently traverse. Like it could have been like a clone operation to the point where we go there, die, and then our soul gets shot back out to our original body on Earth because they can't kill us, and so they found these loopholes of how to like do temporary operations. And so yeah.
You did mention earlier that we originated in essentially our light bodies on that side of the fence. Now we're here. So how does that work out with not being able to come back?
And we'll go back to Black Sun, which it's not my favorite topic. It's a little confusing, and it ties directly into these occult factions. But apparently, all right. So imagine you have the easiest way to describe the very beginning of how this works, or woodwork, chisels. We have a kind of simulator system where we're basically beyond time, and then we have programmable time that's linear from this perspective in physical space. We're beyond time, we're beyond space, we're in the soul realm. So in coming here, we're basically selecting a kind of experience, a string of possibilities that we're going to basically thrust ourselves into, dive into, and expose ourselves to, and whichever way it goes, it goes. And we just have the confidence that we're going to take the lesson, or we're going to take the intentions of how we're going to learn. And of course, this is primarily when we create it, not when it's like overrun by friggin' if like ant people were, like controlling the economy and stuff, which is more or less what's going on. Because then it's a shit show all around. There's no way of basically saying that this is for, the betterment of soul learning and humanity. Like that's where everything went wrong, if you want to look at it that way. And even then, it can't really go wrong. But the idea is that to have the physical existence in a place that's eternal, okay, you have to have a programmable, simulated experience. You can't really bridge it, and nothing from the eternal aspect. Everything that is about to happen, we already know it happened. All we can do is see what happened and go, I know that's going to happen, and then go in, and our memories are gone, and then we experience it as if it's for the first time. So that in that way, it's simulated. It's not actually happening for the first time. So if something were to happen then, and in that way that people can't really like ever, nothing unexpected can happen. And to the degree where if something did happen like that, and basically the person that went in didn't come back out because of whatever changes that took place messed with their awareness in such a way that if that like consciousness were to merge back with the eternal awareness, either that consciousness would die and dissolve, or that eternal awareness would die and dissolve, and you get this duality that can't resolve itself. It's like the unresolved, not the undifferentiated, but something similar.
Mm-hmm.
And So basically, it's kind of like this, where you have a certain amount of souls, and that's all that can exist. You can't make more, you can't make less. That's all it can be. Then you have the simulation area, and you can have more or less bodies, more or less people. And so now, the idea is if the people in the simulation basically do not align and synchronize or gain the memory of coming into the simulation, then what does that mean about the source of their awareness, of their consciousness, as far as who they are? If they didn't come in, then where did they come from? So it's basically kind of like an illusion. It's like a reflection of the people that did come in. And the idea is, if they don't remember coming in, it means that they're not going to remember leaving. And in the same sense, that if they don't synchronize with the knowledge that this isn't all that is, in essence, the soul, activate and enable soul awareness in the body, then that means they're not going to leave, because that's the requirement of actually leaving. The simulation doesn't leave. How is that possible? The TV character comes off and like walks down the street. The guy playing it that has his awareness in that system retracts his awareness, and it goes back into the original being on the outside of the simulation or the system. So if a person's soul awareness doesn't activate in the system, then it means that that consciousness is not going to leave the system. And it simultaneously means that the consciousness did not come from a soul awareness going into the system. It's just a background processing replicant that was created on the spot by the realm itself, or by the controllers of the realm, who began doing these genetic experiments and these events. In the same sense, though, it's not set in stone. You can't make more souls, but the soul is like a cloud, and the oversoul group of, however many souls, you said the number before, there are a few ideas, that can shift between whoever is there. If this person's DNA degrades and they can no longer have that access, it doesn't mean that that soul is completely gone. It means that that soul could be split up between 8 people or so, to the point where it could possibly spread and it go to another person, so to speak, or more fragments could go back to the one where the person basically was beginning to lose power, and re-imbibe that one to the point where somebody had their soul. These groups stole their soul, they were soul scalped, and they were like lost for 5-10 years of their life, and then at a certain point, certain groups came and returned it. They operated or enacted a return to rightful owner clause and began to become self-aware of what had gone on these multidimensional levels, and the soul returns at that point. And so at that point, though, when all of it is done, said and done, everything comes to completion, the souls are what leave the place, because that's what went in. So the beings who are interacting in a way where they're giving away their soul energy, or they simply did not have access to that in the first place, it's the strangest thing, but there's no way for that to leave, because it doesn't exist in the first place. And that way we make sense of that in human terms is not the same as in cosmic terms. Because it's like looking at a person being like, F you, you're not cool enough to exist. It's not like that. It's just the fact that in the end, their awareness is only relative to within the system, unless that person activates on the soul level. But at that point, the way fear works, the way creativity, compassion, all these things change beyond the human level to the point where it's like a cosmic being, where it's beyond the limitations of just a physical being, which when it's just physical, it's an animal. It's just a body without that soul aspect. It's an animal. And some of these experiments created hybrid animals that don't have souls. And it's just like an animal. The desires are the same as what an animal feels. And it's the only reason people don't normally go and run around naked like animals is not because their brains are functioning differently, because it is to a degree, but in the same sense, if there's the same capacity for those desires as an animal, it's the soul, the conscience, the wisdom, the self-awareness, that capacity that keeps people being people. And so when that's gone entirely, you get these animal beings, and those beings, for some reason, I don't know, if I go further than this, it's kind of like it's talking trash. But it's basically like a simulated system with numbers and, like avatars. And if the information resonating within the shell of a person's experience is not interacting with a non-local presence or source, which means beyond the presence of just the body, then there's nothing to leave in the first place. And so, but the point is, if the running explanation is that the realm has been so messed up because of what they did from the point of basically these timeline distortions, that the layer of the shadow self, or more so not the shadow self, but the which is more of like a semi, natural aspect of growing and expansion, the false light system, the black tree of life, the Metatronic system, soul sealing system, is that's basically being shrunken out and collapsing, which is a parasitic system. It's basically you have a tree after like a huge, macrocosm experience, that there's like a branch somebody stitched on, they call it like grafting, to the tree of life, and it's literally just parasitic, and it's sucking energy from the original organic system. That's parasitic to the point where, and this is, I was talking about this in the earlier talk as well, if you have a parasite, if you have a parasite and if you have a host, the parasite has to remain hidden and be sneaky and cunning and all that, otherwise the host will become aware of it, and that's not how parasites work. That's not how the parasitic mind works. If the parasite is well, instead of being too numerous and too visible, too sloppy, okay, not sneaky enough or cowardly enough, if it begins to eat too much and is too big or too numerous, then the host will become aware of it, or as well, it will indirectly basically be drained to the point where there's not enough energy for the host or the parasite. So there's this interplay of stealing energy, but just enough to not let the main system basically get distorted, because then the original system that's being leached off of is no longer capable of being leached off of. So that's what's happening. It's happened to the point that it has hit the fulcrum where they've been growing. They couldn't stop it. Word got out, and a lot of people were like, yeah, let's go in, it's parasite, let's become leeches. And in the same sense, people have been growing in awareness. That can't stop. What else is going to happen? The host is going to grow and grow and grow stronger, and the immune system is going to get stronger, and they're going to get smarter, and eventually they're going to look over and see a bunch of parasites, a bunch of ticks or something. So the two values that must remain in harmony under a certain limit in order to keep this, like mindless game going, are breaking past all the boundaries. And this has been happening for a long time, which is why the majority of people can see what's happening. And they have all these not non-souled, but people whose soul level of awareness is not awakened in the body, that are basically just like completely oblivious to anything going on, or if there are, it's directed completely and entirely using basic conscious mind entrainment. And so it's going to be as simple as watching TV or something, and you're like, that's not right, that's, this shouldn't, they're lying or something. And the guy says, no, it's not lying, it's perfect. And he's like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. Let's go bomb this other country or do this and that and poison in this. And all they had to do was tell the guy, and he's like, all right, that's mind entrainment, mind control. They perfected it. That takes a while to get. There's powerful scientists using very powerful methods to map it out, so they can say anything that guy's not going to resist. But it's to the point where if they pull any more energy, the host will begin to die. And then if that happens, that's the only thing the parasite fears more than being caught. The fact that then they're going to have to make their own energy, and they can't do that. So that means just utter, absolute death. The other is if they are aware, basically, or they grow any bigger, and the host becomes any more aware of their presence, then they'll basically have to begin chopping their own or disconnecting their own and turning on their own in order to save themselves, because there's not going to be enough energy to go around, and they're growing too big. So that's basically what's happening in the system, and that system is like the demiurgic system, it's the AI system, it's the nanites, there's so many multidimensional facets of how you could explain this, but that's what's happening, and it doesn't have the intelligent capacity to interact in the same way that the soul inherently does, which is some part of an original system. And I kind of draw a blank a little bit after that, because of whether this system is inherently connected to like a playground simulator for the soul, or whether somebody invented what seems like a playground for the soul because it's a soul trap, and that's the best way they could create that system. But you can use your discernment to take the explanation from there. And it does eventually go into Black Sun and what space is really like, and consciousness is really like, and where it comes from, and how it looks from maybe the programmer's aspect. Yeah, but in that sense, all the information of the consciousness that's relative to that parasitic aspect, because it's not based in wholeness, it's based in partiality, it doesn't have the capacity to interact outside of that system, and therefore, yeah, it doesn't exist outside the system in the first place. It's hard to describe, and there are better ways to describe it, and there are even more invigorating ways or exciting to the point where it's like, when you comprehend these things and you know that you can comprehend what's going on, if you can imagine how a person who doesn't comprehend these things would be influenced by the realm closing out, or by basically traversing into a higher dimensional view, how their consciousness wouldn't have a relativity point to basically remain, to expand and do what it does to basically become that multidimensional aspect. It makes more sense that there are kind of like shadows of consciousness on this plane, whereas then there are like these it's not like a duality thing of like better than or something like that, but they're like a ball of consciousness or dead end or a segment, and then there's like a cyclic lightning bolt that comes from outside the plane into this plane and creates like a circuitry, and one is souled and one is just like a computer program that's running in reference to its surroundings, like an animal. That's the best ramble I could give for that explanation.
Yeah, I called those two systems just the true divine oversoul and the AI oversoul. To swing this back around as far as Inner Earth, you're essentially saying there are soulless beings, there are beings who are purely of AI consciousness, and these are beings who cannot exist in light bodies in what we're calling Inner Earth.
Yeah, there's a way to crunch all that down into like the parameters that are required to understand it. Basically, they don't have the capacity to interact in that light body aspect, which would it exists beyond this holographic, solid, seemingly solid, like coded matrix existence. Basically, they can't go into real time or non-duality, and then they do, but they can only go up to the gates, if you will, and they bounce around these interdimensionals using technology, flying around on these craft and basically hiding right outside the plane of the third dimension. They inhabited, these parasites apparently inhabited, it's like a dog full of fleas or something, the fourth dimension, and there's just nothing but traps and parallels and side dimensions and underworld, like demonic realities, just like mind, basically it would just be like a mind reality, where they're outside, just outside of the physical perception, which could basically just mean they're in a orb craft that shrinks down in between the size of an atom. So they're like in this room or something, say they could be, or they could also be above a city and like harvesting the energy from a city. And it's just, they're using craft and technology to cheat, to like manipulate. It's basically like a cheat code or Game Shark or something for this dimension, this universe. The weird stuff there is about who gave them technology, which goes back into a whole bunch of weird stuff.
I guess an allegory you could use for that is, if we're existing on one page in a book, they have the ability to leap to multiple pages, but they'll never be able to jump to a completely different novel.
Yeah, and the strange thing is, that means they don't even know how to read. They just know how to jump around from word to word and page to page. They don't know what a book is for. They can't get to another book, because all you got to do is get to another book, is read the book and then go, what else is out there? And then you can go there. Is the universe is free. The train in between universes is your mind and what you want to know. And so they don't, basically that core, that essence, which would be like the center, the heart aspect of the tree of life or all that, they don't have that. They just have this technologically falsified version, which is, it's like a puppetry system. And it's just weird because they depict the absolute similarity or replication of consciousness. However, the imbalances or discrepancies are basically, I don't know how to describe it, it's as valid as you would expect. They just want to like eat and kill and have sex and things like that. It's really weird. It's basically inverted. It's almost like that's the only way you could. If you had it the other way, then it's either approaching towards soul awareness and it just doesn't have a soul awareness there, or, why would they do that if they don't have a soul awareness? So then they would do all the things that a person would do with the soul awareness, but that the person wouldn't do. And so it becomes, now the consciousness is inverted. It's like turned inside out, and what's good is bad and bad is good. And it's basically, the best way to see it is like, say it's like an animal consciousness. But imagine that, if it's so clever, it knows advanced technology and how to trick and mind control people for thousands of years. It's like this really skewered perception. It's kind of like a god, but it's the opposite, like a devil. Like something that's just so imbalance that thrives off of disharmony eventually comes to that concept of a cosmic parasite. That you're in this book, why don't you read it? And it's like, there's no point. I have no desire. Well, how did you get into this universe to begin with? And there's a whole story about all of that.
They can take over the entire story without exactly understanding it.
Strangely. I mean, even then, what it really is that people helped them, and then those people took over humanity for them. And those people are in a lot of deep, muddy water, if you will, because they're the only reason this is happening. That the parasites would have had a stronghold, but it wouldn't have been the same as if people didn't sell out humanity and say, yeah, you attack these spirits or these people from a spiritual consciousness, soul aspect and hyperspace and all that, and then we'll feed you souls and stuff like that. If they never said that, we wouldn't be in the situation to begin with. So, which is weird because it would look, in my opinion, like there's ancient stories of, every once in a while somebody would not capture, but like a demon would manifest, and there would be like this battle between like a saint and like a parasitic monster, interdimensional, and it would just be like something normal, if you will, like a thief and I don't know, somebody otherwise, but maybe that was the beginning of seeing what became this type of, basically what we have now is civilization-wide infection, consciousness infection. And that's how it's described. It's like a pandemic. It's not like light. It's not taken lightly in these operations and systems. And as well, though, it's weird because the people on the other side of the shift, it's almost like a game to them, where it's like, we can't die. They know that the true souls can't die. There's no really, it's all like a show. It's like a nightmare. It's basically like a nightmare where you wake up from the nightmare and it's like, oh, nothing could happen because I'm here, where I am in my bed. Like, we're in our beds on the other side or outside the system. And, until we get to that point, it's like, we think if something goes wrong, we're going to die. And some people continue to maintain that it's impossible to die. At least the people who interact with that level. But I don't want to go into that because it's like, well, who has a soul, who doesn't? So it's just compassion. People are compassionate, there you go. But then that's the thing, when you get the AI beings, they're like, I have a soul, I'm compassionate, and it's like blood's dripping out of the side of their mouth, and like their eyes are red. It's like, shit is weird. It's a puppet or something. Something pretending to be part of the universe, if you will. So, where I was told two things, and one I had come to the conclusion of, and the other I didn't make the connection of, but apparently you only need to know one. What I come to the conclusion of is that the energy of your heart can fluctuate and expand and contract and influence basically in and out of time. It's like a quantum interference system. And so basically the whole idea is about how to traverse back to the original realm upon leaving the body, or how to do it in the body. And the resulting idea is that the heart acts as a kind of gateway. It's the same thing as in the realm. What does the heart do for people? It's basically going to make or break a person's consciousness, personality, experience, their connection to everything, their ability to connect to all. This comes from, looking and saying, well, is it the mind? If I think a certain way, if I think enough, if I read enough, if I learn enough, look at the people that think and know and do and all that, they could be completely devoid of that aspect that keeps a person, integral or central to this universe, to all, not just the universe, but to all that is. It's not even a knowing, it's a desire. And it's a desire that is refined in the sense that it is not physical and pleasure-based, but a outpouring of some sort. And so apparently that equates to when the separation occurs and there's like some type of maximal energy increase or shift or spiral or whatever it is, or inversion of, like, our soul is up and it turns inside out to come into the body and turns back side out, right side up to leave. Kind of like where in the normal place our souls are there, and then they invert everything here, we're all upside down in La La Land, and then everything turns right side up to go back. And so the idea is that corresponds with the heart of the earth, if you will, the heart of earth, to the point where you can go within, and this also has to do with what is called the false light trap, which I've seen during one of the operations where they basically used it on me to show me that they're not effing around. There's apparently well, technically it's not difficult. I've seen technology that can make your soul go pop out of yourself and shoot around and come right back. And that's just like something guiding it. You know, they have consciousness transfer. The whole idea with the light trap is they have a craft that can beam above like a city or wherever it is, and everyone that dies gets magnetically pulled in and then rocketed through like a gateway to basically the moon base, which, you know, they don't tell you at the time. And then there's these like dimensional electromagnetic devices that wipe the energy clean if it's like a magnetic field and they're all aligned a certain way to hold a kind of a mandala for memories and stuff like that. It just makes them all go flatlined. And you know, I've seen other tech for sure, and so that's kind of like, I mean, you could believe that they do stuff like that, but then to believe that they're actually having, you know, that it's actually working, and you know, so basically it works regardless of how that plays out. And but the idea is then, so how to avoid that? And one of the explanations is to, instead of looking out like we're in a holographic realm, is to look in. And when you do this, and there's a frequency maintained, and there's like a 3-step pattern that has to happen, which happens automatically because that's what happens when there's basically a return initiation sequence, something that happens, a return sequence initiation, which is basically a part of the process of dying, or a heightened experience or something like that, where it's basically a harmonization or centering, then an acceleration, and then like a charging or a release of the potential charge into a kinetic charge. Where if you have like a spinning disc and we're on the outside, you can't, it's like the toroid, you can't really stop the disc, and you can't look up or down to gain access to the whole thing. All you can do is spiral into the center and then spin fast enough, like a figurina closing, you know, her limbs together, a ballerina, excuse me, and eventually you expand out because of the centripetal force pulling you outward. And so then at that point, if there's that big magnetic flux pulling, you could basically, there's some other exchange that happens, possibly, you know, folding inside out or something like that through that heart center or whatever it's called, like your own earth, you know, vortex, your own center point. And then basically there's like a dimensional gateway that opens. And that's all done in order, not to avoid, but just because it's partly to avoid this like soul thing that's trying to get people to look up and go to it, which apparently is the moon, which is apparently the embodiment of the demiurge in this holographic environment. And there's a whole bunch of explanations and technology there. And so then the other aspect of that, which I had a feeling that that's how it works, because everything wants you out. So then in world, in this realm, people are doing stuff like that, and you literally just like tune it out and go in. Everything usually turns out okay. So it's like I would have just done that anyway. And so then the explanation with the plane, which I, you know, hadn't given too much thought to, but we're also programmed to not think about certain things that are operation relative. Which is that basically it's said there's a green light. I can't remember. There's a word for it that's from the ancients. They called it like I think you might have used it, like one of like the green mystics or light or something like that.
Ray of green light,
something like that. And then there's another one, not the chakra, but the polar vortex, or the emerald light. That there's just like a gaseous force or something. And that's apparently the original magnetic flux that people would go to if there wasn't this type of false light system to create a false magnetism like system that basically tricks people into going into the other way, which is basically like a construct. It's like a rat trap or something. And apparently one either goes into the heart center, the assemblage point, where there's an infinitely small vortex, basically where all the energy converges. And when it goes so far, well, you're in between atoms at that point. And when you're so far that you're in between the space of spaces here, you go into hyperspace. And at that point, wherever you think, wherever you intend, you go. And so if you're doing that in a state of love, you go to the realm, you know, the frequency of the universe of love. And which is where, obviously, the womb, or the source of creation for humanity, because we're not coming out of the, you know, the bottom end or something like that. I mean, technically we are, but and so, but then the other beings, these demiurgic, these occultic groups that do the other thing, they focus on the other end, and they literally go up the ass of the devil, or the testes, and they become the genitals, because that's what they want. And so it's not, you know, the heart center of it, it's I'm gonna get what I want out of it, and that's that. But as well, they're trying to not do that anymore, because apparently if you do that now, fine. They're holding up the frequencies, they're holding souls here, you come right back when you're ready, when you incarnate through these elite families or something like that. If the realm closes out, because everybody's like, all right, good luck with that, they get trapped in a dimension of, basically a demonic genitalia of the universe, and it's not the actual, would be the actual genitalia, but like these false forms. And so everyone's running backwards, backstepping, because apparently they know, I don't know, they know that that's not a good idea after 10,000 years, and they want to go the other way. Weird stuff. But so the idea is that emerald light is the original, like you say, the compass or something like that, and that's the exit out of this type of void space, and it leads to a civilization where there's basically stability. Instead of a repeating cycle of chaos, it's a constant stability. But that's part of like the whole idea of the emerald light, the path, what they've been doing, and I think it's like an overlay for our own energy system. That again, we're a smaller portion of the whole system. It's about like Lisa Renee was, she talks about this a lot, and so both of your information I was briefed on it then years ago, which is why this is kind of weird, but I just told you, and so it's just about intentions, the intentions that are primarily resonating, motivating, and being the counterpart to why something is done is like a contract with those frequencies. And so if a person says, I don't like that, and I don't have anything to do with that, I don't want to support these beings or that movement or whatever, but their energy every day says something different, then that's what they're actually saying, and that's what they're actually signing themselves on up, like in for, or on for. I don't know, yeah, signing on for. And so when your energy is for the intentions, and the intentions are basically harmony, compassion, truth, knowledge, self-awareness, then at that point, you line all those things, but you can't punch people in the face, you can't insult people for not even at all, but for no reason. And if you're insulting somebody for a reason, well then you're really trying to form some type of critical, thinking, and you're not insulting them at that point. So there's no insulting, there's basically respect out of everything, because that's what anybody would want. When you do that, that surrounds you hyperdimensionally. That is kind of like, the last thing I'll say is that you have the body, and then the body is emitting bioemissions. If you're in physical space, but this is an overlay of multiple possibilities, times, dimensions, streams, whatever, well then from the hyperspace view, your physical body's there, but you're radiating out potential possibilities, and these multitudes of dimensions are actually overlaid all in one, kind of like the Shiva or something, or the multiple arm Buddha. And so if you're emanating out certain intentions, then I distracted myself. Then basically they accumulate and add up, and that's basically what you'll get. I can't remember what I was going to say, because they can see it. In the craft. I'll say one last thing. I forgot that part that I was going to say, but I'll say this: all the possibilities that you could connect with your intentions in the moment exist in an overlay around you. And so when you purify the intentions, where you're creating multitudes of realities that you're connecting with that you can't see. That's part of that. But the other part is that when you go up, if you see a craft, which is not recommended because they could be any faction, sometimes they'll swim from star to star. So that has to do a lot of what, basically, the way it was described, and I've seen this, is that this crazy stuff, this is what they told me, and I've seen some of it. We look up and see from one possibility, and the way the stars look are kind of like the binary LED lights of a complicated computer system of the gears, and depending on the time we're in and the universe version we're in, different stars will be lit up and different energies will basically be activated and shining down. And so they say we went through the spectrum of possible dimensions, it would look like a light show, it would look like fireflies, where stars would be disappearing and different energies would be active. And they would also be rotating in different areas. Like it would rearrange itself. And so from their perspective looking down, they see Earth, but they see every other possible dimension, meaning every different timeline. Meaning we look up and it's like we're looking through glass or water, and it waves when they go by. When they look down, the ground is one way and there's like one dimension, and then it waves like air over a barbecue or something, hopefully for festivals. And as the wave goes and ripples, and you would normally see like somebody's face kind of like if it was heat wave or something, you'd see it kind of like ripple. They'll see a place where the car was painted red, and the ripple will come back and it's the timeline where it was blue, and then it'll go another way, and the ripples are different timelines all impressed upon one another, and because they're outside of the base of the center of the toroid, they have access to the overlay where it's all just fanning out, rippling out like the frills on a curtain. And so from our perspective, they're waving through time and space. And from their perspective, multiple possibilities and timelines of Earth are waving around and dancing beneath their craft. And they can literally frequency tune into one of them and go down to that one and there and that one. They zoom back out and frequency match with another one that they can scan and see and go back. And you can pop out of the time by simply rising enough out of the continuum or whatever it is. And it's like rising out of, water or a heat, like ripples or something like that, mirage, basically. And it's like it's a holographic system, but it's folded. It's folded in layers, kind of like rocks and sediment or something like that. Very strange. But that's the type of stuff where it's like we don't really know how to interact with the universe as far as this really is. We're wearing costumes in like a 4th grade recital or play or something, and we haven't even seen what the real world is capable of and what we're actually in. There's so much going on here. Basically, if you know, you're basically a god just by that definition. But again, the creative force has the heart aspect, otherwise it's not wholeness.
You mentioned all of these parasitic entities, they are going to the moon's light trap upon death, and they have no access to this inner earth paradise, etheric place, but we do because we emit this emerald heart energy that corresponds with the Aurora's emerald energy. In a sense, they're trapped inside of this computer, and we can only trap ourselves, but can pretty much eject as soon as we, for lack of a better phrase, grow up and learn to love.
Yeah, I like how you're keeping everything relative, because that energy at first that was like, oh, this is new energy from you. Now it's I'm like running all over with it and doing the mirage thing where I'm like fluttering through realities and possible explanations instead of like organizing them. I'm just like giving you all of them, but it's the right situation. Basically that's like the gist of it. It's so much more complicated when we want to look at how everything works. Like we're in a big complicated interdimensional or multidimensional or even extra-dimensional clock system. But what we need to do is just give in to love, accept that aspect of wholeness instead of trying to find reasons to not do it, which is essentially harboring what is a parasitic infection, a mind virus, because there's really no reason not to. And crazy stuff is that these beings have been here for the longest time using this technology, as well as people, humans, and you can do anything. You can literally, you can have a computer system map out what you want to do, and imagine like reading through a web page or something, and it's like, oh, all these links are split up, and then the titles to all of them, and blah blah blah. Well, you could have something do that and input the information to your mind in a way, or have it holographically displayed to the point where you can literally learn at this rate of like 25 times what you would normally. The early operations with the scientists, they figured out how to dilate time and use cloning and send a person's consciousness into the clone into an alternate dimension, basically a time bubble, live for 100 years, work on all the technology and develop all they can, die, and come back to the original clone with their memories primarily repressed, because you can only do that so many times and basically have so many lives, like bent in a dilation and inserted back into the same anchor point, the same organic original, without that original big going like loopy. And they did that over and over again until they got basically like 1,000 to 10,000 years, which isn't a good number span, but thousands of years worth of development within like 40 years of time, to the point where now we have 2 civilizations where one runs on just recently iPhones, and those are a whole different computer system and computer design than we were previously running on, and solid state and all that, and now quantum stuff. and another that basically uses plasma computers and like dimensional systems that go beyond anything we can comprehend. So the idea is now that how do we connect the two in bridging the gap? This civilization behind has to hit an exponential growth curve where the rate of increase of complexity expands and increases until the ability to measure that increase is no longer relative to where it started as. It would just be like it's up there somewhere. And as well, that's kind of like a deception, because it's not technological that this has to occur, but in our ability to handle existence and what is they're going to be doing and remain heart-centered and all that, which means it's going to create basically the two races, where it's going to be like the beginning of the one demiurgic AI that goes back to play this whole mess, but simultaneously dies because it's the creation of the humans, the Eternals, that can see all of that as it happens and remain heart-centered and overcome all of it in all time. Meaning it will never exist past that point, past that threshold, which all ties into, it's basically like the unveiling, the near-death experience, the exodus to the center, whatever it is, for time, for history, for minds, for civilizations, for soul. And it's also like this has been held off, because as long as this is held off, they can abuse people and do all that, as well as people trying to advance people. But every time that is advanced, it can be used against people, because it's a weird interplay. It's the weirdest thing. But that was one of the main methods they got. That actually just happened. That you realize you can dilate time, you can do whatever you want. Send your scientists out in 100-year intervals. You advance, 5, 10, 15,000 years in 40 years, but that created a rift and literally a bipolar schizophrenic civilization from two of them from one. I think that's about it. This is completely disjointed for me, basically just because of the amped up energy. I'll tell you why after we end finish the recording. Your work is, like I was saying, it was what we were being told, and being shown by people who were passing on, technically the people that were holding that knowledge and weren't being like weird, these were closer to the knowledge keepers, and it shaped civilization. So it's like that information, and some of it was debriefed specifically on what you were talking about, and I'll tell you more about that after we finalize the recording. So thank you too, and you're providing probably a more clarified version of education, or not education, that's corrupted, but of teaching for people, because a lot of people are liking that and they're making sense of it. And I don't know, I've never seen this before. If 10, 15 years ago people told me like, no, older generations were not going to still give a damn, but everyone that's being born and that is given the opportunity to know these things is going to want to know more, and it's going to change the world, I would have, said I would have died first, which technically I did. But it seems like something is happening now for the first time ever, and it's not just the fact that there's a new year, there's new time. It basically might be that time where this is the generation that makes a difference, but it's also, everything is dualized to the point where this might mean it's also the last physical generation to exist in this same way, which is also why that exodus or unveiling or the disclosure of this corruption system and all that, it more or less has to happen. It has to be pushed. We have to push, and if whatever happens, happens. But if we don't do anything, then we must take responsibility for what does happen or what doesn't happen. If we try, then all we can do is take responsibility for trying and for the fact that something either happens or almost happened. That's all I can really say on that, and that's all I feel. And I hope people look at that and think about that, because we're all in it together. For instance, the guys in the house, I was talking to my friend the other day, the house is burning down, it's 1,000 degrees difference, and say he spits on everything, and it reduces the or not even that, but he has the water that he has on him, and he lowers the temperature by say it's a few thousand degrees, he lowers it by 1,000 degrees or 1,000 joules of energy. I don't know if that's electrical, but it also can amount to heat energy throughout the entire house, meaning it's not, the fire didn't go out, everything burned up, but he's still minus 1,000 joules. Then the guy that's over there in the corner goes, it's worthless, you can't change a thing, one man can't change everything. His words made it 1 degree hotter. He added a little bit of energy. When this whole thing is said and done, and you have the credits for what one guy did, and it's 1,000 points of energy towards humanity, towards liberation, towards that. And the guy in the corner that said you can't do anything, he actually made it worse by just a little bit of the degree. Nothing changes. The guy that applied himself is known as the guy that applied himself, and he may change 1,000 degrees or points or whatever it is, no matter what actually happened in the outcome. The guy that didn't do crap, still, all he did was help it, and he didn't make a name for himself or do anything other than basically go along with it. And at that point, his credit is going to go shoom, and nobody's going to even remember him. And the guy with 1,000 points, even if he struggled and died trying and still didn't change it, he's going to have 1,000 points of credits on that screen as the movie's over and everybody's names gets displayed, and he'll be remembered forever. So no matter what happens and how it plays out, what we do here, this journey, this experience is what it is. And I think that's why they were kind of like always playing around on the other side, where they're like, you can't die, but if you don't do anything, it's just going to be like you would have rather died to make it like have an excuse for why nothing happened. So as long as we try,
science is essentially consent.
Variety of ways. I got so much energy, and it's because what I'm about to tell you after this, but I don't want to keep you up either. So
okay,
I guess we'll stop the recording.
Thank you, Og.
Yeah, thank you. I hope people enjoy it.